Elena Torres had grown used to silence. The long corridors of the naval training facility in Virginia echoed differently at night, when the chatter of recruits, the sharp barks of instructors, and the pounding rhythm of boots on pavement were long gone. By the time she arrived for her shift, most of the base was settling into quiet routines. The cafeteria lights dimmed, the offices locked, and the gym, though still occasionally alive with late-night stragglers, was never as crowded as during the day. It was during these hours that Elena moved through the halls with her mop, her bucket, and her quiet determination. To most, she was invisible. A uniformed custodian in faded blue coveralls, her hair tied back in a tight bun, her eyes always down on the floor she scrubbed. Yet those who looked closer would notice something in her, an economy of movement, a precision, as if she approached cleaning not as drudgery, but as a discipline. For Elena, it was just another form of order, another way to keep chaos from swallowing life whole. She had grown up in Norfolk, the daughter of Cuban immigrants who worked hard, but always seemed to be on the edge of exhaustion. Her father had worked shipyards until his back gave out, and her mother took endless shifts as a hotel housekeeper. By the time Elena was 16, she was helping pay bills with odd jobs, fast food, laundromats, janitorial work. When her father's health worsened, she dropped out of community college and went full-time into cleaning contracts. Now, at 32, she had long since given up any illusions of glamour. She worked the night shift because it paid slightly more, and because it let her avoid the daytime bustle. There was dignity in it, she believed, though few others seemed to see it that way. Every scuff she scrubbed away, every surface she polished until it gleamed, was her own small victory against disorder. The base had been her workplace for almost 4 years. She knew its rhythms better than some of the recruits who passed through only briefly. She knew which vending machines jammed too often, which doors stuck in humid weather, which offices smelled faintly of coffee, no matter how much disinfectant she used. The place had its own heartbeat, and Elena had synchronized herself to it. It was a little after 10 p.m. when she pushed her cart into the gymnasium that night. The fluorescent lights hummed above her, reflecting off rows of weight racks, treadmills, and mats. Normally, by this hour, the space would be nearly deserted. But she noticed immediately that someone was there, a tall man, shirt damp with sweat, pounding out push-ups on the mat near the far wall. She kept her eyes on her work, rolling the mop bucket across the polished floor, wringing out the fibers, and beginning her sweep. She had learned long ago that it was better not to interrupt the trainees or officers who occasionally used the gym at night. They rarely acknowledged her anyway, except with a passing nod, if that. Still, she couldn't help but notice the man. He wasn't one of the younger recruits. His build, his tattoos, the scar on his forearm, they all spoke of years in service. His movements were sharp, deliberate, each push-up executed with flawless form. Sweat pooled beneath him, and he moved as if the effort was cleansing something deeper than just muscles. Elena worked her way across the floor, her mop gliding in steady strokes. Back and forth, rinse, wring, back and forth again. The rhythm was meditative, a dance she had perfected. Some people might have rushed through, leaving streaks or cutting corners. Not Elena. She moved with patience, pressing down with the handle until the floor shone. It was then that the man paused, sitting back on his knees, breathing hard. He looked at her for the first time. His gaze lingered, not in judgment, but in a way that suggested he had just noticed something others often missed. "You always mop like that?" he asked suddenly, his voice carrying across the empty gym. Elena froze for a fraction of a second, startled. Most men ignored her. Few initiated conversation. She straightened, leaning on the mop handle, and studied him carefully. His expression was neutral, but his eyes were sharp, curious. Like, what? She asked cautiously. Like it's a mission, he said, standing and wiping his face with a towel. Most people push a mop like they're trying to kill time. You look like you're trying to win something. Elena's lips twitched. Slightly, almost a smile, but not quite. Work's work, she replied evenly. Might as well do it right. He chuckled, a low sound, and slung the towel around his shoulders. That's one way to see it. Most of the recruits I train don't even push themselves that hard. So he was an instructor then. That explained his presence and his air of authority. Elena had heard about the SEALs on base, their brutal training sessions, their impossible endurance, their quiet intensity. If he was one of them, it made sense that he was still working out while the rest of the base slept. She dipped the mop back into the bucket, wrung it out, and returned to her strokes. Not my business how they do it, she said simply. He watched her for a moment longer, then tilted his head. Ever thought about training? You've got discipline. That's more than half the battle. Elena almost laughed, but she bit it back. She wasn't sure if he was joking or serious. Me? Training? She asked, shaking her head. I clean floors. I don't run obstacle courses. You'd be surprised, he replied. His tone wasn't mocking. If anything, it carried respect. Some people walk around all day in uniforms and never give half the effort you just did on that floor. Elena's grip on the mop tightened slightly. She didn't know what to say to that. Compliments were rare in her line of work, and she didn't trust them when they came. But something about his voice, steady and matter-of-fact, made it difficult to dismiss. Anyway, he said, grabbing his water bottle. Don't mind me. Just an observation. He went back to his workout, shifting into a series of pull-ups, his muscles straining as he lifted his weight again and again. Elena resumed her rhythm, though her thoughts lingered on the exchange. She told herself it was nothing, that he was just being polite, maybe trying to lighten the monotony of his own training. But part of her couldn't shake the odd flicker of pride she felt. Someone had noticed. Someone had compared her to soldiers, even if only in passing. The rest of her shift passed in silence. By midnight, she had finished the gym and moved on to the corridors. The sound of her mop echoed softly, a counterpoint to the faint hum of ventilation. Yet the words of the stranger replayed in her mind. You look like you're trying to win something. What, exactly, was she trying to win? That night, as she wheeled her cart back to the supply closet and clocked out, Elena felt a quiet restlessness she hadn't known in years. She didn't yet realize that the simple act of mopping a floor had set something in motion. A chain of events that would challenge not only her strength, but her very sense of who she was. The following night, Elena's shift began the same way it always did, quiet, methodical, unchanging. She clocked in, rolled her cart from the custodial closet, and started with the hallways before moving toward the gym. The base was calm, save for the occasional footsteps of security or the muffled laughter of sailors returning from the mess hall. For Elena, this rhythm was familiar and grounding. Yet beneath that calm, she carried a subtle restlessness from the night before. It wasn't something she admitted, even to herself, but the stranger's words lingered like a note struck on a piano that refused to fade. You look like you're trying to win something. She didn't often replay conversations with strangers, but this one was different. Most people never spoke to her beyond the occasional thanks or missed a spot. To be compared to recruits even half-jokingly had felt strangely validating, almost dangerous. By the time she pushed open the doors to the gym around 10:15 p.m., she already suspected he might be there again. Sure enough, the same man stood by the free weights, lifting with steady precision. His sweat-darkened t-shirt clung to his frame, and his focus was so sharp, that he didn't notice her right away. Elena exhaled softly, half relieved and half nervous. She told herself it didn't matter. She was here to work, nothing more. Still, she caught herself straightening slightly, moving with even sharper purpose as she wheeled her mop bucket across the floor. It wasn't long before he noticed her. He lowered the weights, grabbed a towel, and this time he approached. "You again," he said, not unkindly. His tone was observational, like he was noting a familiar landmark on a routine patrol. Elena didn't look up from her mop. "I work here, not a coincidence." He chuckled. "Fair enough. You've got a point." For a moment, silence stretched between them as she wrung out the mop and began her first sweep of the glossy wooden floor. He leaned against the weight rack, sipping water from a dented metal bottle. Finally, he spoke again. "You ever think about training like us?" The words caught Elena mid-motion. She froze. The mop paused in midair, water dripping slowly onto the floor. She turned her head toward him, her brow furrowing in disbelief. "Excuse me?" "You heard me," he said casually, as if the question were the most natural thing in the world. "Ever thought about pushing yourself that way? Running, lifting, obstacle courses, SEAL style." Elena blinked at him and shook her head with a small, incredulous laugh. "Me? No, that's not my world." "Why not?" he pressed. She leaned on the mop handle, studying him carefully. He wasn't mocking her. His eyes were steady, genuinely curious. But she wasn't about to indulge the fantasy. "Because I mop floors," she said bluntly. "I clean up after people like you. That's all." His mouth quirked slightly, but not with amusement, more like challenge. "That's what you do. Doesn't mean that's all you are." The words hung between them, sharper than she expected. Elena shifted uncomfortably, resuming her mop strokes just to have something to focus on. "Look, I work. I go home. I sleep. Then I come back and do it again. That's life. Nothing more to it." He watched her for a long moment before nodding. Slowly. "You say that like you're trying to convince yourself." Her chest tightened. She hated how easily he cut through the wall she usually kept around her. She didn't know him, didn't want to know him, and yet somehow he was prying into truths she rarely admitted even in private. "Why do you care?" she asked finally, keeping her voice even. "Because I see grit when it's in front of me," he replied simply. "Most people go through motions. You don't. You put intention into everything you do. That's rare, and it's the only thing you can't fake in training." Elena pressed her lips together, unwilling to give him the satisfaction of a response. She moved steadily across the floor, the mop gliding in precise arcs. The man tilted his head. "What's your name?" "Elena," she said reluctantly. "Chief Warren," he introduced, straightening. "SEAL instructor." Of course, she thought. That explained his presence, his demeanor, his eyes that seemed to measure everything. He wasn't just any soldier. He was one of the elite, the kind of man people whispered about when they thought no one was listening. "Well, Chief Warren," she said, deliberately formal, "I'm just here to do my job." He smiled faintly. "And I respect that. But jobs don't define potential. Effort does." For a moment, Elena met his gaze. It was steady, not demanding, but piercing in a way that unsettled her. She broke eye contact quickly, dipping the mop back into the bucket. The conversation should have ended there. It would have, if not for Warren's persistence. He stayed nearby, not in her way, but not leaving either. When she finished one row, he spoke again. "Tell you what, just humor me," he said, gesturing toward the pull-up bar mounted on the far wall. "One attempt. Doesn't matter if you fail. I just want to see." Elena stared at him, incredulous. "You're serious?" "Dead serious," he said. His arms folded across his chest. No judgment, just a test. A flush of irritation rose in her. She wasn't some sideshow for a bored seal. And yet beneath that irritation was something else. Curiosity. A part of her, buried under years of repetition and resignation, wondered what she could do. She wasn't weak. Her body was accustomed to long shifts, heavy loads, endless motion. Maybe not the same as training, but not nothing either. She set the mop aside. Fine. 1. The room felt suddenly heavier as she walked toward the pull-up bar. Warren followed, but kept a respectful distance, his expression unreadable. Elena reached up, fingers wrapping around the cold metal. The bar was slightly too high, forcing her to jump and grip it. Her palms were rough from years of cleaning chemicals, so the metal didn't intimidate her. She exhaled, bent her arms, and pulled. Her muscles strained immediately, but to her surprise, her body rose. Her chin cleared the bar. Not bad, Warren said quietly. Elena dropped back down, landing lightly on her feet. She wanted to stop there, to walk away with her small victory, but pride urged her back up. She gritted her teeth, pulled again, and again. By the third pull-up, her arms burned, her breath caught in her throat, but she refused to quit. She did 4 before dropping down, chest heaving. She turned to him, expecting amusement. Instead, she saw genuine respect in his eyes. Told you, he said. You've got more in you than you think. Elena brushed sweat from her forehead, her heart pounding with more than exertion. She wanted to dismiss it, to insist it meant nothing. But deep down, she knew that wasn't true. She had surprised herself. And she hated how much that mattered. Happy now? She muttered, retrieving her mop. Warren gave a small, approving nod, more than happy, impressed. She ignored him, forcing herself back into her rhythm. But her hands trembled slightly on the mop handle, betraying the rush she felt. For the rest of her shift, she avoided looking at him. Later, when she clocked out and stepped into the cool night air, Elena couldn't shake the echo of his words. You've got more in you than you think. The mop had always been her weapon against chaos. But for the first time, she wondered what else could she fight against, if she dared. The next few nights unfolded differently. Before, Elena had always entered the gym unnoticed, her cart rattling softly across the polished wood. She had moved like a shadow, blending into the hum of fluorescent lights. Now she was aware keenly, aware of the possibility of being seen, and more specifically, of being seen by him. Chief Warren wasn't always there, but when he was, his presence filled the room. He didn't hover or interrupt her work, but his sharp eyes followed everything. Sometimes he trained alone, other times he gave quick tips to younger sailors who wandered in. No matter what, he carried the same quiet authority, like a man who lived his life on the edge of expectation. Elena hated that she anticipated his attention. She told herself it didn't matter, that she had no business interacting with someone like him. But ever since the pull-up bar incident, something had shifted. She had surprised herself, and worse, she had enjoyed it. It wasn't the compliment that stuck with her. It was the undeniable truth of what she had done. She could lift herself. She could endure. That single moment replayed in her head during long shifts, when she wrung out the mop or pushed heavy equipment. Her arms still ached faintly days later, but the ache carried with it a strange satisfaction. On the 4th night, Warren made his move. She was sweeping near the free weights when he approached, towel draped around his neck. His face glistened with sweat, and his expression carried that same hint of challenge she had come to recognize. You handled yourself on that bar the other night, he said casually. Elena didn't look up. It was nothing. 4 clean pull-ups isn't nothing, he countered, especially in work boots and coveralls. She pressed her lips. Together, the memory of how hard her muscles had strained was still fresh. "I told you, I'm not a soldier." "Doesn't mean you're not strong," Warren said. His voice softened slightly, losing its teasing edge. "Strength shows up in a lot of places people don't expect." Elena set the broom aside and folded her arms, meeting his gaze head-on. "What do you want from me, Chief? You keep circling like you're trying to prove something." He tilted his head. "Not trying to prove anything. Trying to show you something. You've got grit, and I want to see how far it goes." Her eyes narrowed. "Why?" "I'm just the janitor." Warren stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You think titles matter to me? Half the recruits who come through here wear the Navy uniform, but they don't last a week. They crumble the second it gets hard. Grit doesn't come from a paycheck or a rank. It comes from here." He tapped his chest. Elena's stomach tightened. His intensity unsettled her. But something in his tone and honesty, stripped bare, made her hesitate. "Fine," she said cautiously. "What exactly do you have in mind?" His mouth curved into the faintest grin. He pointed at the open floor. "A little test. Right now." Elena's first instinct was to refuse. She had work to finish, floors to mop, tasks that paid her bills. But part of her bristled at the challenge. If she walked away, it would feel like weakness. And she had spent too long proving to herself, to everyone, that she wasn't weak. She sighed. "One test. Then I get back to work." Warren nodded approvingly. "Deal." He clapped his hands once, sharp as a command. "Push-ups. As many as you can. Don't rush form over speed." Elena rolled her eyes but dropped to the floor. She set her palms flat, adjusted her body, and lowered herself down. Years of scrubbing, lifting buckets, hauling supplies had built her strength, though she had never tested it this way. 1, Warren counted. She pressed back up. 2. Her arms trembled by 10, but she clenched her jaw and kept going. 15, then 16. She refused to look at him, focusing instead on the floor beneath her. At 18, sweat dampened her forehead. At 20, her muscles burned. She collapsed on the 22nd, breathing hard. "Not bad," Warren said, crouching beside her. "Better form than half the guys I train." Elena pushed herself to sit up, shaking her arms out. "Satisfied?" "Not yet," he said, standing. "Squats, go." She groaned but obeyed, crossing her arms over her chest and lowering into her first squat. Her thighs protested immediately, but she powered through. 10, 15. By 25, she was gasping. At 30, her legs felt like fire. "Enough," Warren said finally. Elena dropped onto the bench nearby, clutching her knees. "You're enjoying this way too much." He shrugged. "You're holding your own." "That's more than I expected." She shot him a glare. "Then maybe you shouldn't expect anything." Warren chuckled, unfazed. He grabbed a stopwatch from the wall. "Last one. Sprint drills. End of the court and back, 5 times, fast as you can." Elena groaned but stood, her pride refusing to let her quit now. She took her position, heart pounding. "Go." She ran, boots slapping against the floor. Her lungs burned, her breath sharp and ragged, but she pushed harder. She reached the end, pivoted, and sprinted back. 1. Again. 2. By the 3rd, her chest screamed for air. By the 4th, her vision blurred. She nearly stumbled on the 5th, but forced her legs to keep moving. When she finished, she bent double, hands on her knees, gasping. Sweat dripped down her temples. Warren checked the stopwatch. "Not bad. Slow start, but you finished strong." Elena straightened, wiping her forehead with the back of her hand. "Are we done?" He studied her, then nodded. "For tonight." She grabbed her mop, her arms trembling from exertion. She wanted to be angry at him for pushing her, but underneath, she felt something else. A flicker of pride. She hadn't backed down. She had finished. As she resumed cleaning, Warren lingered nearby. His tone shifted, quieter now. You know, most people stop when it hurts. You didn't. Elena didn't look up. I've lived with pain my whole life. A few push-ups aren't going to break me. His expression softened. For the first time, there was no challenge in his eyes, only respect. Exactly, he said. When she clocked out that night, Elena's body ached in ways it never had before. Her arms, legs, lungs all screamed for rest. Yet inside, she carried an unfamiliar fire. Warren had tested her, and she hadn't failed. It wasn't about impressing him, she realized. It was about rediscovering herself. For years, she had accepted her life as fixed. A mop, a paycheck, exhaustion. But in that gym, for those brief moments, she had been something else. Strong, determined, capable of more. As she drove home through the quiet Virginia streets, the thought refused to leave her. She wasn't just a janitor. Not anymore. The soreness lasted for days. Elena woke the morning after Warren's test, feeling like her body had been run over. Her arms screamed when she reached for her coffee mug. Her thighs trembled with every step. Even her lungs seemed to protest. When she took the stairs, she cursed him under her breath with every ache. And yet she couldn't deny the pulse of something deeper. Pride. For all the pain, she had done it. Push-ups, squats, sprints. She hadn't quit, hadn't collapsed, hadn't begged him to stop. She had stood her ground against a Navy SEAL's challenge. And though she would never admit it to him, the accomplishment glowed in her chest. Still, she told herself it had been a one-time thing. A foolish detour in an otherwise predictable life. She was a janitor, not a soldier. She cleaned, she mopped, she paid bills. End of story. But Warren had other ideas. The following week, he was there again when she pushed her cart into the gym. He didn't even bother with small talk this time. Ready for round 2? He asked, already gesturing toward the pull-up bar. Elena froze mid-step. You've got to be kidding me. He shook his head, gritting faintly. Not kidding. You showed me grit. Let's see if it wasn't a fluke. She groaned, rubbing her temples. Chief, I have work to do. Floors don't clean themselves. Work can wait 10 minutes, Warren said calmly. Think of it as sharpening your edge. Elena shot him a glare, but found herself moving toward the bar anyway. Something inside her bristled at the idea of walking away. She wasn't about to prove him right by refusing. Fine, she muttered. 10 minutes. No more. What began as a one-time challenge quickly became a pattern. Every few nights, Warren added something new. Planks, lunges, mountain climbers, core drills. He never pushed her past the breaking point, but he always pushed her further than she thought she could go. And every time, she surprised herself. At first, she hated him for it. She hated the sweat dripping into her eyes, the burn in her muscles, the way her hands shook when she gripped the mop afterward. But with each small victory, a piece of her resistance eroded. She began to look forward to it, though she would never have admitted it aloud. And Warren noticed. You've got a natural engine, he said one night, after she finished a grueling set of burpees. You don't stop. That's more valuable than speed or power. Elena wiped sweat from her face with the sleeve of her coveralls. An engine doesn't mean anything without a car to put it in. He smiled. Then maybe it's time you start building one. She rolled her eyes, but her heart thudded in her chest. His words stirred something she had buried long ago, the possibility of more. One evening, weeks into their unofficial training sessions, Warren pushed her harder than ever. He had set up a circuit: push-ups, squats, sprints, and then to finish. A wall sit. Elena hated wall sits. Her thighs screamed within seconds, and her pride battled against the temptation to collapse. Sweat rolled down her face as Warren crouched beside her, stopwatch in hand. 30 seconds, he said calmly. Her legs shook violently. She clenched her jaw. 45, she wanted to quit. The pain was unbearable, but his voice was steady, anchoring her. 1 minute, hold. Don't you dare drop. Her body trembled like it would split apart, but she stayed. Time, Warren said finally, clicking the stopwatch. Elena collapsed, sliding down the wall and gasping for air. Her legs felt like fire. But when she looked up, Warren was smiling, not the smug smile of someone proven right, but the quiet pride of a teacher watching a student grow. That's grit, he said simply. For a moment, she didn't feel like a janitor. She felt like someone who could endure anything. Word spread slowly around the base. Sailors passing through the gym started noticing the late-night custodian, who sometimes put herself through punishing circuits alongside a SEAL. At first, they laughed. The janitor's training now? They whispered. But as the weeks stretched into months, the laughter faded. They watched her persistence. They saw her lungs heave, her arms shake, her face pale with exhaustion. And yet she never quit. Some began offering her nods of respect. A few even asked to join her, though Warren always shook his head. She's on her own program, he'd say. Elena hated the attention. She wasn't doing this to prove anything to anyone else. But deep down, the respect felt good. For once, she wasn't invisible. At home, her body bore the marks of the transformation. Muscles firmed where there had once been only endurance. Her sleep deepened. Her mornings started earlier. On her days off, she caught herself going for short runs, experimenting with bodyweight exercises. Her cheap sneakers wore down faster. She bought a second pair. Her mother noticed the changes. "Mia, you're glowing," she said one Sunday. Over dinner, "What are you doing?" Elena only shrugged. "Working." Her father raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. He had always respected silence more than explanations. But alone at night, lying in bed, Elena admitted it to herself. She was training. She was becoming someone she had never imagined herself to be. It wasn't easy. Some nights, she hated Warren with every fiber of her being. He never let her coast. If she showed improvement, he raised the bar. If she finished faster, he added more reps. And his words sharp, unrelenting cut through every excuse she tried to make. "You've lived through worse than this," he'd say when she faltered. "You think pain means stop? Pain means keep going. There's no finish line. There's only the next step." Elena wanted to argue, but he was always right. Every time she pushed through, she proved to herself that limits were only illusions. And every night she went home, sore and exhausted, she carried that fire with her. One night, after an especially brutal circuit, Elena sat on the bench gulping water from a paper cup. Her hands shook as she tried to steady her breathing. Warren stood nearby, arms crossed, studying her. "You're not the same woman who walked in here months ago," he said. She laughed bitterly. "Still a janitor, though." He shook his head. "Titles don't define you. You're building something most people never touch: resilience. Doesn't matter what you wear. That's warrior stuff." The word warrior echoed in her chest long after he left the gym. She lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, unable to shake the thought. Maybe she was more than a janitor. Maybe she was becoming something else entirely. The turning point came unexpectedly. One night, as Elena scrubbed the locker room floors after a workout, 2 young recruits stumbled in, laughing. They ignored her at first, tossing their bags down and joking loudly. But then one of them sneered, "Hey, isn't that the janitor who thinks she's in training?" The other chuckled, "Yeah, saw her the other night. Looked like she was dying." Elena kept her head down, scrubbing harder. She had learned long ago to tune out ridicule. But before she could finish, Warren appeared in the doorway. He must have overheard. "You two think you're funny?" he barked, his voice slicing through the air like a whip. The recruits froze. "You laugh at her? She's got more grit in her than both of you combined. You think you could last 10 minutes against what she's been doing? Try it." The recruits stammered excuses, their faces flushing. Warren stepped closer, eyes blazing. "Respect is earned," he growled, "and she's earned it. Don't you ever forget that." The recruits mumbled apologies and hurried out. Elena stood frozen, mop in hand, stunned. When Warren turned back to her, his expression softened. "Don't let them get to you. They don't see what I see." Her throat tightened. She wanted to thank him, but the words caught. Instead, she only nodded. For the first time in years, she felt truly seen. That night, driving home, Elena realized something profound. She had spent her whole life cleaning up after others, invisible, dismissed, overlooked. But Warren had forced her to face what she carried inside. Strength, grit, resilience. Hidden strength, yes, but not hidden forever. And if she kept pushing, maybe one day the world would see it too. The base was like a small city, full of its own gossip, rhythms, and hierarchies. News didn't travel by official memos or command briefings. It flowed through whispered conversations in the mess hall, locker room chatter, and knowing nods. In hallways. And slowly but surely, Elena became part of that gossip. At first, it was just curiosity. Sailors passing through the gym noticed the janitor running drills under the watchful eye of Chief Warren. Some assumed it was a joke. Others thought Warren had lost a bet. A few dismissed it as pity. Maybe he was just humoring her. But weeks stretched into months, and the whispers shifted. "She trains with Warren every night. She doesn't quit. I saw her do more burpees than Jones. She's tougher than half the recruits." By the time winter turned to spring, Elena had earned something she had never expected. Respect. It showed in small ways. A young sailor once held the door open for her, something no one had bothered with before. Another nodded at her in the cafeteria, almost like greeting a fellow peer. A few recruits even asked her questions about workouts, to which she responded with curt, practical answers. She didn't crave attention, but she couldn't deny the shift. And Chief Warren, though never one for flowery words, began to show his approval in subtle ways. "You're quicker on the sprints," he remarked one night, stopwatch in hand. "Your form's cleaner on the push-ups." Another night, "You've got more endurance than when we started. Keep building." He never coddled her, never softened the edge of his challenges. But Elena had learned that respect from a man like Warren wasn't given lightly. Every clipped observation, every rare nod of approval, carried more weight than 100 empty compliments. Still, respect wasn't universal. There were those who resented her presence. Some recruits muttered under their breath, irritated that a janitor drew more acknowledgement than they did. Others mocked her when they thought she couldn't hear. But what surprised Elena was how little it bothered her now. Months ago, their words would have cut her, reinforcing the invisibility she had lived with all her life. Now she brushed it off with a shrug. Let them talk. They weren't in the gym at midnight, lungs screaming, muscles failing, while she pushed through another set under Warren's relentless eye. They didn't know her strength, but Warren did. And slowly, more and more of the base was beginning to see it too. One evening, Elena was halfway through a grueling circuit when a group of off-duty sailors walked in. They crowded by the doorway, smirking. "Hey, look," one whispered loudly enough for her to hear. "The janitor's in training again." Elena's jaw clenched, but she didn't stop. She powered through her squats, counting each rep silently. Warren's gaze flicked toward the group, sharp as a blade. "You got a problem?" The sailors fell silent, shifting uncomfortably under his glare. "Didn't think so," Warren said flatly. He turned back to Elena. "Keep going. Don't break rhythm." She obeyed, her pride burning hotter than the ache in her thighs. When she finally collapsed on the bench, drenched in sweat, the sailors were gone. Warren handed her a water bottle. "You just outlasted their opinions. That's how you win respect." Elena sipped slowly, her breath ragged. "Feels more like survival." He shook his head. "Survival is giving just enough to get by. You're doing more. You're proving you belong in any room you walk into." The words sank deep, though she didn't respond. At home, Elena's family noticed changes she tried to hide. Her mother commented on her posture, how she carried herself taller. Her father, usually quiet, observed the new calluses on her palms when she helped him carry groceries. "You've been working harder than usual," he said. It wasn't a question. Elena only shrugged. Something like that. But inside, she knew it wasn't just work. It was transformation. She was no longer the woman who drifted invisibly through her shifts. She was becoming someone who demanded space simply by showing up, by enduring. The turning point came during a scheduled fitness challenge on base. It wasn't official Navy training, but an event meant to boost morale, an endurance course open to anyone willing to participate. Most entrants were recruits eager to prove themselves, but a few seasoned sailors joined too. Elena hadn't planned to compete, but Warren insisted. "You're ready," he said firmly. She shook her head. "I'll look ridiculous. I don't belong out there." "You've already done more in training than half those kids will manage," Warren countered. "You don't need to win. You just need to finish. That's what respect is built on." After a long silence, she agreed. The day of the challenge, the gym buzzed with energy. Sailors filled the bleachers, cheering for their peers. The course was brutal push-ups, sprints, weighted carries, rope climbs. When Elena stepped onto the floor in her plain workout clothes, the whispers started immediately. "That's the janitor. She's competing? No way she makes it past the first round." Her stomach twisted, but she ignored them. She focused on the feel of the mat beneath her shoes, the steady rhythm of her breathing. Warren stood at the sidelines, arms crossed, his sharp gaze fixed on her. The whistle blew. Elena launched into push-ups. Her arms screamed almost instantly, but she forced her body into rhythm. She was slower than most, but her form was solid. She didn't quit. Next came sprints. Younger recruits blew past her, legs pumping like machines. She lagged behind, but refused to stop. Each lap a battle against her own lungs. Weighted carries. Elena hoisted the sandbag, her shoulders trembling, but she staggered forward step by step. Recruits who had mocked her earlier faltered halfway. She didn't. The rope climb nearly broke her. Halfway up, her arms shook violently, sweat blinding her eyes. She almost let go, but then she heard Warren's voice, steady and sharp above the roar of the crowd. "Don't you dare stop, Torres. Finish it." Her jaw clenched. She pulled, inch by inch, until her hand slapped the top of the rope. The crowd erupted. By the time she crossed the finish line, she was near the back of the pack. She wasn't first, or even close. But she wasn't last either, and most importantly, she had finished. As she bent double, gasping for air, Warren stepped forward. He raised his hand in salute. Not the crisp, regulation salute of duty, but a slow, deliberate gesture of respect. The crowd went quiet, then followed suit. Sailors across the gym, officers, recruits, even skeptics raised their hands in salute to the janitor who had refused to quit. Elena's throat tightened. For once, she didn't feel invisible. She felt seen. After the event, word spread faster than ever. She finished the challenge. Warren saluted her. Did you see the crowd? Elena found herself walking through the base with a new kind of recognition. Not everyone respected her, but many did. And for the first time in her life, she didn't shrink from it. She held her head high, not because she craved attention, but because she had earned it. And in quiet moments, she admitted the truth she had once buried. She wasn't just mopping floors anymore. She was building something greater: strength, dignity, and a respect that no one could take away. Respect was never the end of Elena's journey. It was the beginning of a new set of challenges. In the weeks following the base-wide fitness event, she became something of a quiet legend. Sailors who had once walked past her without a second glance now nodded when she entered a room. Recruits whispered her name like a cautionary tale. Don't underestimate her. She's tougher than she looks. Even some officers, usually too busy to notice anyone outside their immediate circles, began to look at her with curiosity. But admiration brought pressure. For the first time in her life, people were watching. Her nightly training sessions with Chief Warren became more demanding. The circuits stretched longer. Weighted runs became routine. Rope climbs turned into timed challenges, with Warren barking instructions like a drill instructor. There was no gentleness in his voice, no allowance for the fact that she wasn't a recruit. He treated her like a peer in training, and Elena rose to the challenge. She woke before dawn to run through the empty streets of her neighborhood. On her cleaning shifts, she carried heavier loads deliberately, testing her strength. She ate with more discipline, swapping the sugary snacks she once leaned on for lean protein and vegetables. Her life, once defined by quiet routine, was now shaped by determination. And people noticed. One morning, while jogging past the barracks, a young recruit joined her stride. He introduced himself as Carter, a wiry 19-year-old with too much energy in his voice. You're Torres, right? The janitor who did the challenge? She gave him a cautious glance. That's me. You're kind of famous, you know. He grinned. Mind if I keep pace? Elena wanted to brush him off, but something in his eagerness reminded her of herself, the way she once craved acknowledgement but had been too afraid to ask for it. So she nodded. They ran together in silence, their footsteps echoing against the pavement. By the time they reached the turn back toward base, Carter was winded. Elena wasn't. You don't mess around, he gasped. She allowed herself the faintest smile. More recruits began approaching her. Some asked about form, others about endurance. At first, she resisted. She wasn't a trainer, wasn't certified, wasn't official. But Warren pushed her to engage. They see something in you, he said. Don't waste that. You've already broken the barrier that separates you from them. Now use it. So she began offering advice, not elaborate, just practical. Keep your shoulders tight on push-ups. Don't start too fast on long runs. Save fuel. Breathe from your diaphragm. You'll last longer. To her surprise, they listened. And more surprising still, they improved. But breaking barriers also meant breaking assumptions. And not everyone welcomed that. Some mocked her openly. Look, the janitor thinks she's a coach now. Others dismissed her efforts as a sideshow, a novelty that would fade. She's just playing at being one of us. Give it time, she'd burn out. And yet, Elena endured. Every night, she returned to the gym. Every morning, she laced up her shoes. Every day, she carried herself with the same quiet discipline. That had caught Warren's attention months earlier. The more they doubted her, the harder she worked. One night, Warren decided to push the limits further. You've built strength. "You've built endurance," he said, tossing her a weighted vest. "Now we're going to build grit under load." The drill was brutal. A timed mile run with the vest, followed by push-ups, sit-ups, and burpees, then another mile. Elena's lungs burned, her legs screamed, and her body begged her to quit. But every time she slowed, Warren barked from the sidelines. "Move, Torres. Don't stop. Pain is temporary, prove you're not." When she finally collapsed at the end, chest heaving, Warren crouched beside her. "You see that line you just crossed? That's the barrier most people never get past. You can live there now." Elena stared at the ceiling of the gym, sweat dripping into her eyes, and realized he was right. She had broken through something. Inside herself, fear, doubt, the invisible walls she had built around her own potential. The sailors began to shift too. One evening, Carter and 2 other recruits invited her to join them for dinner in the mess hall. It was a small thing, but for Elena it felt monumental. She sat at their table, listening to their stories, laughing at their jokes. For once, she wasn't the invisible janitor on the sidelines. She was part of the group. Even outside the gym, the change was noticeable. When she mopped the hallways, sailors no longer brushed past her without acknowledgement. They greeted her. They thanked her. A few even offered to help carry her cleaning supplies. The lines that had once separated her from them, the uniform, the rank, the unspoken hierarchy, were still there, but thinner now, more fragile. She had broken through enough to be seen not as the janitor, but as Elena Torres. Of course, the hardest barrier to break was within herself. She still wrestled with doubt. Nights when her muscles ached so badly, she could barely move, she wondered if it was all worth it. Mornings when she looked in the mirror, she still sometimes saw the invisible woman she had been, not the fighter she was becoming. But each time, she remembered Warren's words. "You belong in any room you walk into." So she kept walking in. The true test came unexpectedly. One evening, a group of recruits struggled through a particularly harsh endurance drill. They were faltering, breaking ranks, dropping before the circuit was complete. An instructor shouted at them, his voice echoing through the gym, but it only seemed to make them falter more. Elena was nearby, finishing her own set. She watched them collapse one by one, the frustration heavy in the room. And then she stepped forward. "Get up," she said firmly, her voice cutting through the noise. The recruits glanced at her, surprised. "You think I'm stronger than you?" She challenged, sweat still dripping down her neck. "I started with nothing, no training, no uniform, no one expecting me to succeed. And I finished. You will too. Get up." Something in her tone, calm, steady, uncompromising, lit a fire in them. One by one, they pushed themselves back into motion. They didn't finish pretty, but they finished. The instructor stared at Elena with raised brows, then gave her a sharp nod. That night, she realized she had crossed yet another invisible line. She wasn't just inspiring from a distance anymore. She was leading. Later, Warren pulled her aside. "You know what just happened in there?" She shook her head, still catching her breath. "You stopped being the one who needed to prove herself," he said. "Now you're the one showing others how it's done. That's the biggest barrier there is." Elena thought about his words long into the night. She had entered the base as a janitor, unnoticed and overlooked. She had been challenged, tested, doubted. But now she was something else. Not a SEAL, not a recruit, but a symbol of what grit could accomplish. She had broken barriers she never thought possible. And for the first time in her life, she wasn't just surviving. She was leading. The announcement came in the form of a simple flyer pinned to the corkboard outside the gym. "Base-wide fitness challenge. Open to all personnel. Spectators welcome." Most who passed barely glanced at it. For the recruits, it was another grueling test to survive. For the seasoned sailors, it was a chance to prove they hadn't grown soft. But for Alana Torres, it was an invitation that stirred something deep inside her. She had trained for months in shadows. She had run with recruits, sweated under Warren's sharp eye, endured mockery, respect, and self-doubt. Now there was an opportunity to step into the light, not as a janitor, but as a competitor. Still, she hesitated. When Warren found her staring at the flyer late one evening, mop in hand, he didn't ask what she was thinking. He already knew. "You're ready," he said simply. She frowned. "Ready to embarrass myself in front of the entire base?" "Torres," he replied, his voice steady. "You've done more in that gym than half the people who'll sign. This isn't about winning. It's about showing them what grit looks like." "You already know what that means," Elena sighed. Part of her wanted to dismiss it, to remain in the safe bubble of anonymity. But another part, the part that had carried her through midnight runs, through bruises and blisters, through the humiliation of being underestimated, leaned toward yes. That night, she filled out the entry form. Word spread quickly. "The janitors competing?" Carter said with wide eyes when he saw her name on the list. "Guess she wants to prove herself again," another recruit muttered, half impressed, half skeptical. Whispers circled the base. Some laughed. Others cheered her on. For the first time, Elena realized her decision wasn't just about herself anymore. People were watching, waiting to see if she could carry the weight of the reputation she'd unknowingly built. The day of the challenge arrived, crisp and cold. The field was buzzing with energy as sailors, recruits, and staff gathered. Loudspeakers crackled. A scoreboard had been set up near the track. Elena arrived early, dressed not in her cleaning uniform, but in plain workout gear, black leggings, a gray t-shirt, and the worn sneakers that had carried her through countless miles. She felt exposed without the anonymity of her mop and bucket. Carter jogged over, grinning nervously. "Didn't think you'd actually do it." "I almost didn't," Elena admitted. "Well," he said, shifting on his feet, "I'm glad." "You did. Wouldn't be the same without you." A challenge began with a 2-mile run. Dozens of competitors lined up, muscles taut with anticipation. When the whistle blew, the crowd erupted in cheers. The frontrunners sprinted out aggressively, while Elena settled into a steady rhythm. She remembered Warren's advice. Don't chase anyone. Run your race. Her legs carried her with the familiar burn she had come to respect. Around the track, she passed clusters of sailors gasping for air. She wasn't first. She wasn't last. She was consistent. By the final lap, Carter was flagging. Elena fell into stride beside him, urging him forward. "Don't quit now," she said between breaths, "one step at a time." Together, they crossed the line. Not leading, but not falling behind either. Next came the strength circuit. Push-ups, pull-ups, burpees, deadlifts. The crowd pressed closer, shouting encouragement. Elena dropped into push-ups with mechanical precision. Her arms screamed by the 30th rep, but she didn't stop. She climbed the pull-up bar, the memory of that first night flashing back one night. Warren had dared her to prove herself. Then, she could barely do a handful. Now she knocked out set after set, teeth gritted. When she dropped from the bar, sweat dripping, she heard someone in the crowd shout, "That's Torres." Another voice followed. "She's killing it." For the first time, the cheers weren't just for sailors or recruits. They were for her. The rope climb loomed next. A thick, knotted line dangled from a high beam, challenging every competitor to ascend. Elena eyed it, memories flooding back of her first miserable attempts. Rope burn, failure, humiliation. But tonight, the rope didn't intimidate her. It was simply another barrier to break. She leapt, gripped, and climbed. Hand over hand, legs braced, muscles quivering. The crowd gasped as she reached the top, slapped the beam, and descended with control. On the ground, her chest heaving, she realized she had silenced the last of the doubters, at least for this moment. The final test was endurance. A sandbag. Carry across the length of the field. By then, exhaustion weighed on every competitor. Elena hoisted the sandbag onto her shoulders. It crushed her with its awkward weight, pressing against the months of doubt and struggle she had carried privately. Each step was agony, but she forced herself forward, jaw clenched. Halfway through, her legs threatened to buckle. The crowd's cheers blurred into a single roar. Carter stumbled beside her, his sandbag slipping. She caught his arm, steadying him. "We finish," she rasped. Together, they trudged on, step after step, until the line was finally beneath their feet. They collapsed side by side, the sandbags, falling with a heavy thud. The scoreboard confirmed it. Elena hadn't won. She hadn't even placed in the top 3. But she had finished stronger than many, steadier than most, relentless until the end. The announcer's voice echoed, "And let's give it up for civilian staff member Elena Torres, who has completed the challenge alongside our sailors and recruits." The crowd erupted. Applause thundered across the field. For Elena, it wasn't about numbers or rankings. It was about proving once and for all that she belonged. As she sat catching her breath, Warren approached. His expression, as always, was stern, but his eyes held something rare, pride. Without a word, he raised his hand in salute. It wasn't regulation. It wasn't expected. It wasn't for a fellow soldier. It was for her. Slowly, one by one, others followed. Sailors, recruits, even officers. A wave of salutes spread across the field, not bound by protocol, but by respect. Elena, too stunned to move, felt tears sting her eyes. She hadn't just finished a challenge. She had broken through the last barrier, recognition. Later, when the crowd dispersed and the adrenaline faded, Elena sat quietly on the edge of the field. Carter plopped down beside her, nursing sore shoulders. "You know," he said between gulps of water, "you're never going to be just the janitor again." Elena laughed softly. "I never was. People just didn't look closely enough." Warren, standing nearby, nodded approvingly. In that moment, Elena realized the recognition wasn't about the salute, the applause, or the whispers of her name. It was about something deeper, the acknowledgement of her resilience, her discipline, her refusal to quit. She had entered as invisible. She left as unforgettable. The morning after the challenge, the base carried a different kind of buzz. Sailors who usually passed Elena with a nod or no acknowledgement at all now stopped to greet her. Some offered handshakes, others clapped her on the shoulder. "Hell of a run yesterday," one recruit said as he jogged by. "You've got more grit than most of us in uniform," another added. Elena accepted each word with humility, though her heart swelled at the respect she had fought so hard to earn. For once, she didn't feel like a shadow sweeping corners after everyone had gone. She felt seen. When she returned to her cleaning shift that evening, her mop and bucket no longer felt like symbols of invisibility. She pushed them down the corridor with a quiet pride, as though each stroke of the mop was part of her story, not something that diminished her, but something that had built her. The base commander himself stopped her outside the gym. He was a tall man, silver hair, presence sharp as steel. Elena had always avoided eye contact with him, uncertain if he even knew her name. "Ms. Torres," he said. She froze, almost dropping the mop. "Yes, sir? I watched you yesterday." His voice carried the weight of authority, yet softened, with respect. You reminded everyone on this base that toughness isn't confined to a uniform. That kind of resilience, he paused, is the foundation of this Navy. Elena blinked, too stunned to respond. Keep training, he added. You're an example now, whether you like it or not. Then he walked on, leaving her. Rooted in place, mop in hand, heart pounding. The recognition didn't stop there. Weeks later, photos of the challenge circulated on the base's official bulletin. One picture in particular drew attention. Elena climbing the rope, sweat streaking. Her face, determination blazing in her eyes. Underneath, the caption read, "Strength can come from anywhere." Soon, her story spread beyond the gates. Local news outlets picked it up, intrigued by the tale of a janitor who outlasted Navy recruits in a grueling test. Reporters came knocking, cameras flashing. At first, Elena shrank from the attention, uneasy with being called a hero. But Warren reminded her, "You didn't ask for this spotlight, but you earned it. Use it for something good." She began speaking at small events, first to the younger recruits at the base, then at local schools and community centers. Her message was simple. Resilience isn't about medals or ranks. It's about refusing to quit when quitting feels easiest. "I don't wear a uniform," she told one group of high school students. "But discipline doesn't come from what you wear. It comes from what you choose to do every day when no one's watching." The students, many from tough neighborhoods, listened with rapt attention. For them, Elena wasn't some distant figure in a shiny uniform. She was real, ordinary, relatable, and that made her extraordinary. Her relationship with the sailors deepened, too. Recruits began asking her for advice, not only about fitness, but about mental toughness. She started informal training sessions. Before her cleaning shifts, running laps with them, or guiding them through bodyweight circuits. "You're tougher than you think," she would say, echoing Warren's words back to them. Carter, once a nervous and struggling recruit, became her closest ally. They often trained side by side, pushing each other through exhaustion. "You lit a fire in this place," he admitted one evening as they finished sprints under the fading. Light. People work harder now, not because they're told to, but because they saw you. But recognition brought challenges too. Some criticized her, saying she was only popular because of a stunt. A few muttered that she didn't belong in spaces reserved for military personnel. Those words stung, reopening old doubts. One night, after overhearing two sailors dismiss her efforts, Elena nearly walked away from it all. She thought of retreating back into anonymity, where she was safe, invisible, unjudged. But then Warren appeared, as if sensing her turmoil. "You think they don't doubt me?" he asked quietly. "Every man here has faced someone questioning if he belongs. That's the fight, Torres. You've already proven yourself. Don't waste energy convincing people who refuse to see." His words steadied her. She realized that recognition wasn't about universal approval. It was about living her truth, no matter who resisted it. Months rolled into a year. Elena's story continued to ripple outward. She was invited to community fitness events, women's empowerment panels, even veteran support programs. Each time she carried the same humility, reminding her audiences, "I'm not special. I just refuse to quit." The Navy SEAL who had once challenged her became more than a mentor. Warren often introduced her as the toughest civilian I know, a title Elena carried with quiet pride. Eventually, she was offered a position, beyond janitorial work, officially overseeing a new resilience and fitness initiative on base, designed to train both recruits and staff in physical endurance and mental grit. The program wasn't about military readiness alone. It was about life skills, discipline, and perseverance. When she accepted the role, she stood at the podium, scanning the crowd. For the first time, she wasn't holding a mop or standing in the shadows. She was front and center, her story the foundation of something bigger. Still, Elena never let herself forget where she started. She continued mopping floors on some evenings, even when her new role didn't require it. Not out of obligation, but as a personal reminder. One night, Carter teased her. "Don't you have people to do that now?" She smiled, dipping the mop into the bucket. "This mop built my strength long before anyone noticed. I won't forget it." And she meant it. The mop wasn't a symbol of invisibility anymore. It was a symbol of the grit that carried her to recognition. Years later, when new recruits stepped onto the base for the first time, they often heard whispers of the janitor who had faced down a Navy SEAL and won his respect. Some dismissed it as myth until they met Elena herself, now leading resilience training with the same sharp eyes and steady voice that once silenced a gym full of skeptics. She never exaggerated her story. She told it simply, always returning to the moment it began. A woman mopping a floor, underestimated until challenged. And each time she ended with the same line: "You don't need to be in uniform to be strong. You just need to keep showing up when it matters." For Elena, life didn't become easier, but it became fuller. She found purpose not in applause, but in the quiet moments when a struggling recruit pushed through one more lap, or when a young girl in a school gym whispered, "If you can do it, maybe I can too." She had been invisible once. Now, she was proof that the unseen could rise. And in the end, she was never just the janitor who mopped the floor. She was the reminder that resilience could challenge even a Navy SEAL and win.